Francis Beylotte III is running for the Charleston County School Board to represent the West Ashley area. He's also a parent of a student in the Charleston County Schools and is concerned about the reopening of schools. I speak exclusively with Francis for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook.
Francis Beylotte, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Quintin, thank you for having me. It's good to see you. I wish it was in person.
Oh, no worries. We'll get back to that soon. Obviously, you are a current candidate for the Charleston County School Board to represent the West Ashley area, but you also have a student inside the Charleston County Schools. And as you know, many students are going back to Charleston County Schools, whether it be in person or virtually, in 10 days. Why is the school district still planning and not implementing?
Quintin, that's the $900 million question. And I wish I had the answer to it. I can tell you this, as a parent, both of my kids are sitting home today and they really should be in school. And I'm disappointed that they're not, whether that's my choice to have them in person or to have them virtual. They should be in a learning environment today, but they're not. And the reason they're not is because the school board and the high-level administration at the central office didn't do anything to plan for this. And they dropped this playbook yesterday. The playbook they've been talking about came out yesterday. It's 137 pages. And all 84 principals are supposed to operate from this playbook on their own at their discretion. And I don't see how that's even going to be possible. So in short, I don't know. I don't know.
And as you know, according to the Post and Courier, Charleston Schools and MUSC released a playbook to help reopen classrooms safely during the coronavirus outbreak. And as you mentioned, there are at least 84, I believe, independent applications with the playbook. With those applications, Francis, should the Charleston County School District be able to allow parents to go into the schools, look around before they decide whether to have their students in person or virtually?
Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely. Yes, 100%. And that's another reason why it's so sad that they're waiting to the last minute, because it's going to be next to impossible to coordinate something like that. But it's really something that as a parent, I should be able to go look at each of my schools and say, okay, I feel like this is safe for my kid in person. But right now, I'm just going to send them there and hope that I can trust a group of people who really don't interact with the community in any realistic or authentic way. And so, yes, absolutely. I wish. I hope that happens. Maybe it will. But yeah.
And I know there are at least 137 pages with if and when possible in the playbook. You just said, hey, listen, that just came out yesterday, the playbook, that is. But then who actually drafts this playbook?
Well, I don't know. I don't see any authors listed. I see some authors listed in the mental health section. I think the playbook is great. I mean, I love the playbook. I think it's like a textbook. It is comprehensive. It is detailed. But really what it does is duplicate a lot of the stuff we already know from DHEC and stuff we already know from CDC and other large research groups. It seems weird that Charleston County is only allowed to use that. Seems like other districts in the state should be able to use it, but you know, there's issues probably above my pay grade that I don't understand. But I'm just telling you right now as a parent, which is how you asked the question, I think that this should have came out in June or July at the very latest. And principals, if they were going to be given the responsibility to implement the details of this playbook, should have been able to draw on resources from the community within their own school and from other places to make this happen. And as you said, give parents the opportunity to walk through the school and say, hey, this looks good to me. I'm going to send my kid there in person. And it hasn't happened. So, you know, honestly, I lost track of what they're doing because everything is changing at the last minute. They're scrambling around. They were going to have the virtual academy.
Right.
They're not going to have it. And now they're going to have 25%, but we don't know which criteria are used for selecting those 25%. They conducted a couple of surveys with really poorly worded questions that failed to capture what the community is asking and looking for. It's just, and let me just say this, Quintin. You know, when I decided to run in June, I told myself I was not going to sit on the sideline and throw stones because this is hard. This is difficult. I understand that. And this board and this district and really all leaders have been given one of the most challenging things you could ever imagine. Okay. So it's easy for me to sit here on the sidelines and throw stones, but it's been abysmal. It's just really been bad. And I really don't know what else to say. And like I said, I recognize the difficulty that these folks are up against, but to just wait and wait and wait and fail to communicate is just unbelievable.
And you talk about those poorly worded questions. What questions should have been used?
I think that what they needed to do was I think they tried to force a sort of dichotomous group, which is a group who wanted all in person and a group who wanted all virtual. I think what they needed to do was capture the desires of a group of parents who wanted to restart schools based on a contingency of the nature of the disease and the pandemic. So being able to make a change every 2 weeks, which is what they eventually did. Don't get me wrong. They eventually did that. But at first they were trying to say in person, virtual. And most people, I think, are in the middle, where they want their kids in school as soon as possible, but they want to be able to evaluate it and base it on criteria, epidemiological criteria, as well as visual criteria of their own school. And I feel like at least the first survey failed to capture that. And also you had a huge amount of parents. I think you had a large percentage of parents who didn't even respond. So there really should have been a more concerted effort to get out and get a full sample of what parents think.
And I hate to ask this. It's a very simplistic question, but you talked earlier about resources. What resources do the schools or the parents need right now?
Teachers need PPE. They need to be able to wear scrubs. They need to have resources in place that allow them to focus on academics instead of cleaning and sanitizing and doing all the things that, happen in a hospital are going to have to happen in a school. Except in a hospital, there's a full range of staff providing that support for nurses and doctors. But in the schools, of course, as usual, the teachers and the administration is going to have to do it all themselves. So, really, if you really get down to it, it's PPE. I know they got a nurse in every school now, which is fantastic. I think they need additional personnel to support teachers in that setting. And I also think, speaking of teachers, they need to give teachers the choice, truly give them the choice, whether or not they want to teach in person or not, because a lot of teachers have pre-existing health conditions and that we shouldn't be putting them at risk like that.
You talk about the PPEs and all those other necessities right now. What cleaning protocols should be changed? And which system should be in place to guarantee proper cleaning supplies that are going to be readily available?
Well, I would, like I said, I think the playbook hits that on the head perfectly. I think following what is written in the playbook is what I would propose, and I think it's excellent, and I like it. I just, like I said earlier, wish we would have got it in June, and I'm not sure why.
Let me go back to obviously virtual learning, because when you look at the chart for the Charleston County School District's e-learning, what are the red flags there?
12 teachers. 12 teachers for the whole district. That's not enough. That's like 500 kids in a class based on the number. So for some reason, they never found enough teachers to do that. And that's part of the reason why they maybe wanted to pull the plug or tried to talk some people who signed up for it into doing the homeschool-based, not home and your home, but their neighborhood school-based virtual learning. So that's the huge red flag right there.
Well, if a teacher were to have 5 classes a day with 30 students, for instance, should all 150 of those students stay home and quarantine for at least 14 days?
You mean if there's an exposure?
Yes, sir.
Again, I agree with everything in the playbook. The playbook outlines how that needs to be implemented. So yes to your question. If there's an exposure, you need a 14-day quarantine. You need to do contact tracing to see who has been in contact with that child or teacher or parent. And that has actually happened to a couple of private schools that started in the last couple of weeks. They had a parent come in at one school with a who tested positive, and they basically had to send all the teachers home for 14 days. And so this is where this is difficult, but I think at the center of this should be, parents should have the choice whether or not to send their kids in person or to stay virtual until they think it's safe. And CCSD needs to set up a paradigm that acknowledges and recognizes that choice. My personal choice as a parent would be virtual until it's safe. until some criteria are met that make me feel like it's safe and there won't be a massive outbreak. Other parents, they don't have the same concern, and I recognize that, and that's their choice. Just look at Florida, for example. In the past 2 weeks, Florida had 9,000 kids test positive for COVID because they started back in person, and we're not prepared, and we're not following proper PPE protocol. So we don't want to get in that position. We just don't want to do that.
And what plan do you want to see from the Charleston County School District that will ensure a parent that qualified substitute teachers are available in the case that regular teachers aren't?
That's a difficult thing. I was a substitute teacher for a few years, and there's a huge variety in the quality of substitute teachers. Some are just there to make sure, everybody stays in the room, and others actually follow the curriculum and teaching plans laid out before them. So I think if we have a shortage of qualified teachers, we have a shortage of fast track teachers, we're going to have a shortage of substitutes. So it's going to be a big problem. And I don't know what their policy is for recruiting substitute teachers. Maybe a lot of these people on Facebook demanding that everybody go back in person should sign up to be substitute teachers. That would probably be helpful.
And I meant to ask you this earlier, but why has society allowed the income gap to become severe and the distribution of resources to be so inequitable that most districts cannot provide online resources for rural students?
Oh my gosh, Quintin, that is a good question. I don't know. I mean, the income gap and the wealth gap exists in the United States and in South Carolina across, and is expressed in multiple domains, but one of the most important one is in educational equity. In South Carolina, for example, in Charleston County, the educational inequities fall neatly across race, and where you see predominantly Black and children of color schools that have less resources and less things to operate and pivot quickly into a virtual environment. And, besides the pandemic, that's the number one issue in Charleston County. Putting the pandemic aside, the number one issue is inequities that fall across racial lines in the district. So we can have a full discussion about that if you want to. But in other words, it's complicated.
And where are those inequities in your district?
They're in Stono Park. They're in the former, we used to have West Ashley Middle School, but that school was shut down and turned into a 6th grade academy.
Right.
I'm not sure what the long-term plans on that, but there were differences between C.E. Williams and West Ashley Middle School. Now those different, was that because of race? I mean, because C.E. Williams is 40% Black and West Ashley is 55% Black. I think what happened in the past 5 years is West Ashley Middle School was neglected and starved of resources for reasons that seem very suspicious but are unknown to me. I know that all of a sudden during this whole process last year, Orange Grove sent out an email that said they want the property and they also want Stono Park. There's been other reports about Orange Grove taking over that property in the Post and Courier going back to 2016. So you have to ask yourself, why are these schools not provided the resources they need year after year after year? And I think it's because they're intentionally neglecting these schools as a way to argue for the privatization or the outside partnerships to come in and take over the schools, or to use that to sort of close the schools and consolidate them into larger buildings.
What are those outside partnerships that you are keeping your eye on?
The TNTP, which used to be called the New Teacher Project or something. That is Caroline Belcher's former employee, and that group has provided consulting services this year for the district in the form of $140,000. So I don't know what that's for. That group is probably maneuvering outside, ready to take over the quote-unquote acceleration schools next year. It seemed very odd that they passed the acceleration school policy on the board last year, but didn't get any reasonable or acceptable proposals to take over that school. So I'm assuming this year, after this election, or maybe even in the fall, they're going to get some. They're going to get some better applications and move quickly to have these private partnerships take over these schools.
How many applications are we talking?
Right now, I don't know.
Yes, sir.
I don't know. I think last time, I don't know if you got a chance to look at the applications. They just weren't very good. So I can understand why the board didn't move on those, but it just seems strange to me that after all this trouble and this fighting among school board members and the community about this issue, they passed it and then nobody sent in proposals. That's just strange to me.
Was the board informed about these proposals?
They should have been. They should have been. I don't know why the proposals that came through were not of good enough quality to implement them. I think, but the issue I have with this, Quintin, is that you have a bunch of people who are saying, we can't do anything for these schools. We give up. Like, we give up on these schools. We just can't figure out how to fix these schools. So we need people from outside to come in and help us take over the schools. So if that's the case, the people who are giving up need to move aside and resign and let the independent people take over the schools. But they're doing both. They're keeping this huge administration and they're bringing in these outside partnerships to take over schools. And for me, I don't think that's a good approach. If I'm on the board, I'm never going to give up on a school. I'm always going to try to improve a school using a community-centered approach. I'm never going to just throw up my hands and say, we give up, can somebody please come in? Just ask yourself, if your plan is to ask other people for plans, you don't have a plan. You know what I mean?
Let me ask, yes, and
Yeah.
I understand, and a lot of people do too, but let me ask you this. Caroline Belcher is alleged association with that group. Is that a conflict of interest?
Well, you know, a conflict of interest starts by the appearance. Is there an appearance? Does it appear to be a conflict of interest? If it does, it needs to be investigated further with proper disclosure of all relationships in a way that's transparent and out front. And so I think we just need a lot more transparency across the board at CCSD in a way to evaluate any potential conflicts of interest. You know, there's a thin line between a conflict of interest and corruption. So we need to make sure we're monitoring that and the public is aware that people are making decisions based on public and community demand and not outside hidden interest. Just be transparent and we'll figure it out.
And I hope to get Ms. Belcher on Quintin's close-ups to get her side of the story on that. But let me get back to, obviously, the schools reopening, and let me talk to you about the enrollment form. Where exactly will students be placed if parents don't respond to the district's enrollment form?
No idea. No idea. I mean, can they just show up to their neighborhood school on day one? Probably. I don't think they're going to turn anyone away. I know Michelle Simmons was talking about this at the Q&A yesterday. I think she said to call the principal. If you haven't filled out the survey and assigned a place for your kid, call your school now. And that was a good answer, and I agree with that. Also, it was asked, what if you signed up for the virtual academy a week or two ago and you changed your mind and you want to go in person or you want to go homeschool virtual model? Again, you should call the principal, call the leaders of your individual school and see what will happen. So
Let me ask you this too. When it comes to safety, how should daily health screenings for students, teachers, and staff be conducted?
That should be done under the leadership probably of there's a school nurse assigned to every school now, which is fantastic. It should have always been that way. We also need enough mental health counselors and social workers at every school, but that's another thing for another day. And it was part of my platform last time. It's still the platform this time. So I think you need to follow the leadership of the healthcare professionals that are at the school in collaboration with the assistant principal and principal in terms of answering those questions.
Should Charleston County School District teachers be granted, just in case in an event they're potentially exposed or diagnosed with COVID, should they be granted some sort of special leave?
Yes. Yes, they should.
And, you know, throughout this entire time, how is this going to put stress on the teachers as well as the students? Or has it?
I think it's putting a lot of stress on the teachers. I think that's crystal clear that you have a lot of teachers that are stressed about this. And as far as students go, I think you need to answer that question from a developmental perspective. I think older kids are going to respond to this and be able to act in a way that's very different from, say, first graders and second graders. That's why, for example, I believe the playbook was established as an elementary, middle school version and then a high school version. It's a lot harder to explain to a 7-year-old why they need to keep their mask over their nose all the time, why they can't pick their nose, why they can't touch their face. And that's really, really difficult. So that creates a different set of challenges versus a 16-year-old, almost grown person who gets everything that you're talking about and understands it. So, yeah.
Now, earlier we talked about resources, and of course some parents are questioning CCSD and its resources. Why is the school district so poorly resourced?
Well, I think, $900 million is a lot of money. That's the budget of CCSD for 84 schools. I think that's a lot. I think that probably is enough money. I think what's happening is they wasted $1.2 million on this virtual academy that they may or may not use. They spend money, $150,000 for a consultant here, a consultant there. And I think when you look at the budget, you think there's ways that this money can be spent differently, and it needs to be focused on instruction in classrooms. As I said earlier, 51% of the $900 million budget is spent on instruction. Could you imagine any other private company or business spending 50% of their revenue on on administration? Most places spend 5 to 10% on administration, and the rest is operations and runs the business. So I think CCSD needs to get to the point where they're spending 65, 70, maybe 80% of their budget on instruction, because that's what they do. That's what they need to focus on. So I'd like to figure out why they're doing this and how they can justify it. If I'm on the board, that's going to be a priority for me, is to direct all the funds into instruction as soon as possible.
You talk about those consultants that they hired and all this missing money. How much is this going to what's the tab for the actual taxpayer, like you and me?
It's huge, but the thing is, we don't know what that's for. Again, we have this huge central office. You remember in 2018, Jake Rambo got a Freedom of Information spreadsheet that listed all of these folks at CCSD. I don't remember, 30, 40, 50 of them making over $100,000 a year.
Sure.
Now, he released that. Jason Saccharin, who's on city council now, who works for CCSD, replied in the city paper with an editorial, and his argument was, if we want quality folks making district-wide decisions, we need to pay them money. If you want to bring folks in who can make great decisions for the district, you need to pay them $100,000. And I heard him, and I said, okay, all right. And then you look at now. If there was ever a time, like I said, that paying a lot of people $100,000 a year to sit at the central office and make policies, the time to show that that's effective and worth our money was this summer. And they didn't do that. And the thing that gets me is you have all these folks making $100,000 or more doing these district-wide administrative jobs. And then on top of that, they want private operators to show them how to run the schools and to run the schools. Or on that, they hire consultants to do studies and to do communications and to do all this. So it's like, if you had a bare bones central office that didn't have 50 people making $100,000 a year, then I could see why you would want to bring a consultant in to help you with the project and then move on. But the thing is, they're doing both. They're hiring all these consultants. They're spending all this money on private operators to show them how to operate schools, but then they're still there. So you're just asking yourself, where is all this money going for these highly paid administrative folks?
And you talk about those private operators. How much did the school district spend in the 2018-2019 semester?
That's a good question, because, I think we're talking about Meeting Street, because that's the only one we have right now. And meetings, according to their budget, Meeting Street has basically the average district allocation per student, which is about $10,000. But the thing is, here's my issue. That school has another separate pot of money, right? And that pot of money is used for anything you want in the school. So in our neighborhood schools, for example, if a PTA raises $100,000, that can't be used to hire a social worker. That can't be used to hire a nurse. That can be used to get uniforms or get a new, repave a running field.
Right.
On the public-private partnerships, that money can go to hire another teacher. So they have 2 teachers in every classroom. They can be hired a social worker. It can put an actual medical clinic inside of the school. So the thing I wonder about with that school is, yes, they have their $10,000 per student from the district. But if you look at what they're doing, there has to be another pot of money. And is it another $10,000? Is it $20,000? How much is that school really spending per student to provide the services they have? And that is not known.
Okay, the school district, I guess what you just said, $10,000 per student, I believe.
Ballpark, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Roughly, how much is the school district getting back?
Getting back, what do you mean?
Money-wise, from the meeting street.
I don't know. You mean, well, you mean getting back in terms of educating kids and making them better people to be high-functioning adults? That's what the investment is. What we're getting back when we spend money is we're turning folks into excellent citizens, and that's our job, essentially. So is that happening at every single school? No. Is it happening only at Meeting Street? No. And the question is, how do we make that happen? Now, what's called the Meeting Street model is a model that teachers and parents have been asking for 50 years. We want smaller classes. We want 2 teachers in each class. We want mental health and actual health supports within the school. We want other resources. We want strong, active measures to encourage parent participation and engagement. All those things are present in this so-called Meeting Street model. These are things that teachers and everybody have been asking for 50 years. So the question is, why are they not doing that in other schools if they now have the evidence to show that it's effective? And the question you must ask is why last year did they close down a neighborhood middle school and then the following meeting expand Meeting Street into a full middle school? You know, why aren't they replicating that model in West Ashley Middle School, for example? Why is that model just sitting at Meeting Street and not being replicated in all the other schools? And that to me is just, it's irresponsible to do that. And it suggests that there's something else at work. And I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. But
Mr. Beylotte, let me ask you this. What organization is making decisions for the Charleston County School District?
These are good questions, Quintin. I would like to think that the community's needs are centered and they're making decisions based on feedback from the community. But I can tell you my experience over the past year and a half has been that that's not happening. Take, for example, after I ran for the board in 2018. After I ran, I stayed engaged. I sat down with all the members who won, Cindy, Kate, Priscilla was already there, right. Eric Mack, and I said, listen, you guys ran a good job. You ran a good campaign. You won the election. What can I do? What can I do to help make this work? I sat down with Josh Bell. I tried to figure out what he wants. And all of that stuff sounds fine. But when it came time to implement stuff, we were sort of pushed out of the picture. We were put into these mission critical meetings where our feedback in West Ashley, for example, was completely ignored. And then in other mission critical meetings, things that were mentioned by just a few people ended up being central to the policy agenda. And so I don't think there's ever been natural, organic engagement from the community about setting a policy agenda. And once I realized that, it became very frustrating. And then they did what they did with West Ashley Middle School. And I realized that they're not operating from the best interest of parents in the community. They have some other agenda moving forward. What is that? Are there people organizations behind the scenes pulling strings on that? I mean, who would want to spend $1 million having school board folks elected and not expect a policy agenda to follow up for that? So, I mean, is the Coalition for Kids and the Chamber of Commerce really pulling the levers behind the scenes? I don't know. They must have some kind of influence because they're the people they endorse seem to always win.
Let me ask you this too: who's actually meeting the needs of the community?
I don't know. The reason I'm so cynical right now is because I don't see that anywhere. I see it being manufactured or reverse engineers, or what we call manufacturing consent, where you create these mission critical meetings and then you kind of push agendas into the public, and then you have folks that are guiding the process to drop policies into there or wedge them into the final report. And then you turn around and say, look, this is what the community wants. And I can tell you this from attending all those meetings in person, that is not the public-private partnership expansion across 15% of the schools in the district is not what we demanded. And again, going back to the D10 mission critical, they asked us explicitly, do we want a big single mega middle school? And it was universally said, no, no, no. We want West Ashley Middle School, given the resources that it should have been given 5 years ago when you asked for the referendum money in 2014. Part of that was to help West Ashley Middle School grow and improve. They didn't do it. So you're asking us now, why do we want to take this school that you neglected and ignored and smash it into another school and put half the kids in trailers? None of it makes sense, Quintin. None of it makes sense.
And I know I'm probably going off the beaten path here, but as you know, and I've interviewed you multiple times for Quintin's Close-Ups, you've always told me, hey, you got to get rid of the constituent school boards. Where are you right now with that?
Well, I think, I was involved in the single member bill. I was an advocate for that. I wanted that to go in place. I think when the single member bill is fully in place in 2022, you're going to have more direct accountability between board of trustees, elected officials, and the communities they serve. I think when you have at-large voting, it dilutes the effect of individual communities. And I think if you looked at the neglect, essentially, of West Ashley over the past 5 years, you can see that the true accountability that should exist between elected board members of West Ashley does not exist. For example, during this whole process, I wrote to Chris Frazier and Eric Mack, never, ever received a reply. Not one time have I ever received, not even a boilerplate, thank you for writing me, I'll get back to you later. I mean, I get responses from Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham, so I don't understand why Chris Frazier and Eric Mack can't take the time to send me a note or something. Priscilla Jeffries replied a few times, but the only thing she ever told me is that she was extremely concerned about hiring Caroline Belcher, but yet she abstained from that vote. The thing is, we don't have our community-based members engaged with the school board. And I think the only way to get that is to make them accountable for this small cluster of voters. And that's why I didn't propose that. That's why I support that. Now, are those county council districts gerrymandered? Are they problematic? Yes, they are. Are every district from the state house to the state senate to the United States Congress problematic and gerrymandered? Yes. But we cannot have true single member representation and wait for gerrymandering to be solved. That's another issue. It does need to be solved, and we need to be engaged after the census with making sure that the school districts that are drawn have the right representation for those communities. For example, right now, I'm running for the West Ashley seat, but you've got three folks also running for the West Ashley seat who are basically D23, right? And so right now, when you have countywide votes, it makes it almost impossible for someone known in the D23 community to win in Mount Pleasant and West Ashley and James Island, because it's kind of like another world out there. These communities are separated, but somehow brought all together by this huge, huge, huge district. So we're the size of Rhode Island, our district, our county. And it's just, and I can tell you from running for school board before, it is hard to run a countywide race and know every school from Minnie Hughes to Morningside. And so in the past, the constituent boards, they had power, they had authority, they could hire principals, they could make policy decisions. But what happened over the years is those powers were taken away from them. So now they don't really have much power at all, and anything they do can be overturned by the central or the board of trustees. So my argument is either give constituent boards more power like they had, or take all the responsibilities on to the board of trustees. And I think when you have single member districts, you will have more direct accountability between communities and their elected board members.
And you probably mentioned this just a few seconds ago, but where actually is the diffusion?
Sorry, what do you mean by the diffusion? Oh yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I think if you look, for example, at the outcome of the last election in 2018, excuse me, you see that the person running for the Mount Pleasant seat who received the most votes from Mount Pleasant was Jake Rambo. He did not win. So are the needs of Mount Pleasant and their will being served by the election process? I would argue no, it's not. Are these communities, does North Charleston overwhelmingly vote for Cindy Coates? You have to look at the data, and if the question is no, then there's your diffusion. So you're allowed to really gather votes from all different parts of the district. And I guess the other side of that is that it makes members think of the whole district with every decision. But that's how it is everywhere. You're always going to think of the whole district, but you really have to be a voice for your community, and you have to be accountable for that community to be a voice. Anyone who argues for single member should also say that the Charleston County legislative delegation should all be elected at large from the Tri-County area, you know, and that doesn't work that way. You need accountability, and that's why the bill passed, and that's why it had full it had bipartisan support across the spectrum. You look at the co-signers of that bill, it wasn't just Stavronakis. You got Nancy Mace, you got Lynn Bennett, you got Crystal Matthews, you got J.A. Moore. I mean, that is the spectrum right there. So that tells you something that's really, it's needed, and we need to move forward with that. I was wanting it to be in place now, and that's what makes this current election so pivotal, because it's really the last gasp effort of the special interest to be able to manipulate another countywide election. Because if you're just a regular guy like me and maybe raise a couple $1,000s, you're going to get buried with this special interest money. I mean, if you got people who can spend $1,000 over and over and over, or if you got these special interests spending millions of dollars outside on a campaign, how can some like regular person raise a couple $1,000s and win? That's why the single member is better, because when you have single member, the only people who are going to win are not going to be able to buy the seat. They're going to have to be known in their community. They're going to have to be the kind of person who walks into any school in D10 and people say, oh, I know him, I know her. But right now you got these people who just come out of nowhere and they buy a seat. And that's the disadvantage of the countywide at-large thing. And unfortunately, we have to deal with that for 2 more years. But after that, I think we're going to get into a proper alignment of accountability. So, you know, this next election, I believe, you know, if you think the Coalition for Kids spent a lot of money before, wait till you see what they do now. Wait till you see what you do now. But these grassroots candidates like myself, you know, like I said, we'll raise a couple $1,000s. I'm not going to be able to buy billboards. I'm not going to be able to buy TV ads. That's just something you can't do with a school board race. The school board race should run about $3,000 to $5,000. Anybody who has to spend $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 to get on the school board is not going to be accountable to the community, because the community doesn't have that kind of money. The people who give me money are giving me $5, $10, $15, and they just want me to be a voice for them. But people who give you $1,000 and $5,000 bundles, what do they want? Are those public school parents? No.
Why? You touched on something I really want to drill into. But why was the decision to hire Caroline Belcher was so controversial?
Look at her CV. Look at her resume. Her resume is a wish list of the organizations that push for the privatization of public schools. Okay, it's very suspicious, very, very suspicious. And like I said, Priscilla Jeffries sent me an email and said, "Here they come. They're coming to take over." And she was right. And so you have to ask yourself, what's going on with this? Why is this she's the central person of the Safe Start. And, you know, word on the street is they're setting her up to be the next superintendent. And if she does, she will open the floodgates for privatization of all of our public schools, because that's what her resume suggests. Now, what we're talking about here is a difference of philosophy, okay? I'm not saying these are bad people versus good people, right? I'm talking about differences in policy ideas, okay? So you've got people who believe that, for example, the Mike Pence, Indiana model is the best application for Charleston County public schools, because a lot of these folks are pushing the Indianapolis network school model, okay? But I don't look to Mike Pence's Indiana for the best way to reform schools in Charleston. I look to the communities that exist in Charleston. And I think this generation right now can be successful where previous generations have failed, because I think we have a new level of energy. We have complete consolidation around the need for equity, And I think we have a community-based effort that's ready to push for excellence and equity at the same time. The era of John Graham Altman is over. But the question you have to ask is, what reform agenda is going to move forward? One thing Caroline Belcher and I agree with is that the status quo is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. Where we differ is how to improve those. I think the way to improve them is from the bottom up, within the community, collaborating with teachers. They think it's by bringing in outside people to do consulting and take over schools. And that's a decision the voters have to make this year, which agenda they think is best for getting us towards excellence and equity.
Why are you running now instead of 2022?
That's a good question. I think, you know, I think running in 2022 would be better, because I would only have to campaign in my district, and it would be a lot more, think I'd be a lot more successful. But the thing is, nobody stepped up to run. You know, I don't think there's a voice from the community, as far as when I filed, that really stepped up from West Ashley. Now others have once I filed, but I was waiting, and I didn't want to wait till the last day to file. So I filed about a week and a half before and decided to go for it. So I'm looking for somebody who can be on my squad and help me move forward with a positive agenda that's centered in the community for West Ashley. I also have to mention that, you know, in 2018, Quintin, I sort of had to live with the fact that I might have been instrumental in stopping Paul Padron from getting on that board. Because if you look at the anti-incumbent vote, it was really split between me, Paul Padron, and Herbert Fielding, right? And so in 2019, when I saw all this nonsense I was talking about, I had to live with the fact that, you know, that Paul Padron should have been on that board, and he should have been fighting for us, but he wasn't, because of how I might have split the vote. So that just made me think, okay, should I just back off and let other people take care of it? No, I didn't. I decided I need to work even harder to make sure that we can get the community's voice centered on the board. Because the thing is, like, they're playing the long game. This privatization agenda with Michelle Reed and Teach for America and all these .org alphabet soups, they've been working on a corporate framed, money-backed agenda since 2015. They're playing the long game. These folks like Jim Ravitch and not Jim Ramich, and who's the chair of RISE, and all these folks, John Reed, they don't have kids in Charleston County Public Schools. Their kids are my age. And so they can play the long game. But when you talk to people like me, the policies that are being made right now affect my kid today. So the changes that are made need to be centered around parents and parents' voices. Right now on the board, you've only got 2 members who actually have kids in CCSD schools. Now, I know that's not a requirement to be on the board, but I think it's important that people understand the day-to-day struggles of parents in the school system when they're making district-wide policy decisions. And you don't see that. And for example, the only other second person is sending his kids to private school, apparently. Todd Garrett said that. So, you know, now we're going to have nobody basically on the board with kids in schools. And that just, we get lost. They get lost.
Now, yes or no, quickly, just a one-word answer. What year do you see privatization in Charleston County?
Say that again, please. Sorry.
What year do you anticipate privatization in Charleston County schools? What year?
2021, depending on the outcome of this election. So if the privatization agenda-backed candidates are able to keep 1 seat, they'll have enough of a majority on the board to continue with this agenda. The board comes down to 5 votes, right? There's 9 people. If you want to get something done, you need 9 votes. Excuse me, you need 5 votes. So right now they have 5 votes. They just need Chris Frazier to be reelected, or some of the other candidates associated with them, like Charles Monteith. If they're elected, then they still have 5 votes. And those 5 votes can get anything passed, and the other 4 people can protest and kick and scream all they want to. So as soon as the next election is over, that privatization agenda will go into turbo mode, or it'll be stopped. And so the question I have is, what choice do the voters want to make? Do they want to turbocharge privatization, or do they want to stop it and center it in the community? And so that's why people need to think about not only who they're voting for individually, but which other 4 seats they're going to vote for. And so that's why they needed to make a decision based on, 4 other folks that will come in and have a 5-person majority and be able to recenter the agenda for CCSD with communities under the banner of students, parents, and teachers, not outside special interest.
Francis Beylotte III, thank you so much for your time. And again, Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Wait, it's good to see you. Hey, Quentin, let me just say this, okay?
Yes, sir.
I wanted to say this at the end because I didn't want to look like I'm buttering you up. But I just want to say that what you do is so important. Independent, investigative media is essential to a democracy, and I really appreciate what you do.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I'm doing God's work.
Thank you. Take care.
You're welcome.